DefSec 2022 podcast presented by Cisco. It is day 2 of the trade show, and I can tell you day 1 was fantastic. People are starting to flood in again now. They're in their booths, getting ready for the second day, and today is focused on workforce development, and we're looking forward to a lot of conversations around that today, but also still diving into some of the technology that's on the trade show floor. I can tell you, our next company and our next guest, the future is here when we talk to these folks. So Russ, without further ado, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Russ Baker. I am co-founder at Avalon Holographics. We develop holographic displays. That term is a bit loaded, it gets misused in the marketplace a little. We're talking about the real deal, so actually natural 3D, just look at it and it just looks like real stuff.
Right.
This is new tech. There's probably nothing, most people wouldn't have seen this stuff before because it's just coming out of labs now and we're kind of in the lead. We've been in business since 2015. We've been working on the displays and had our first display out in 2019. Slowed down by the pandemic, of course, and now we're catching up. So a lot of trade shows now with the first and we just came out with the second generation technology. So we're pretty excited. We're getting a lot of interest from all the forces, but particularly the Navy. And that's sort of the nutshell of where we're at today.
Russ, you dove into that. You were so passionate about your tech. You didn't even tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, me, yeah, sure. So myself, I'm actually a Calgary native. My co-founder, Wally Haas, and I both went to University of Calgary. He married a Newfoundlander, so the company's actually based in Newfoundland now.
Okay.
However, I live in Ottawa, but my background is in startups. So I've been in tech startups my whole career. Wally as well has been, we both came out of the semiconductor industry actually, the networking semiconductors.
Okay.
Were you at Nortel at one point in your life?
Wally was. Yeah. I'm one of the very few that never went through the Nortel mill, but I know lots of them.
I bet.
And yeah, it's because I was mostly in startups, that's how I avoided it. And so having done startups for a long time, pretty familiar with that front end process of going and figuring out what to build and why people want it. And
right.
So that's really what I do, is talk to, in this case, in defense, talk to all our Navy, Army, Air Force, Special Forces customers, and go from, okay, holographic display sounds obviously interesting, but really, what do you need it to do, and what don't you need to worry about? So this is my 5th startup. The other 4 were successful in some way, not necessarily home runs.
Right. 5 startups.
Yeah.
I said, you're a glutton for punishment. Eh?
Yes, there's a reason the hair is no longer brown. And Wally actually had a pretty successful startup that I was an advisor for about 2005, 2010. So that's kind of how we got into this market, this space, is we had a pretty successful exit, had some seed capital,
right.
Talked about what we're going to do next, and said we should do something big and crazy and cool,
right.
And we landed on holographic displays, and here we are.
Russ, walk me through so when you say holographic displays, my mind kind of goes to Mission Impossible type scenarios where you see the display in front of you.
Yep.
True situational awareness, like you're actually looking into the space itself.
Yep.
Am I close?
Yeah, essentially yes. So there's movies are able to essentially draw on the screen, so they can cheat in ways that physics doesn't really let us do in the real world.
Right.
So some of what you've seen in CGI in movies isn't realistically achievable, and what I'm talking about there specifically is the floating light kind of all around you, like in Iron Man.
Right.
And in you see in Star Wars when they would have the Death Star just kind of hovering in a room and everyone's all around it. Mm-hmm. That's pretty tough to pull off. We actually started the company inspired by Iron Man 2, and that's what we kind of wanted to do, and then we found out physics was not going to cooperate. So what we're talking about is the same, conceptually the same, but you actually have to have a display surface, like a screen. The light has to come from somewhere and hit your eyes. So it's some of the movies that have done this well, like Prometheus has a holo table is a pretty common trope, I'll say, in science fiction, games, and movies. And that's actually a pretty good depiction. So you've got this table, and you've got things that are above the table surface, things that sit below the surface. Looks kind of like just a 3D volume. Looks like it's a physical model sitting there, except it's digital and it's dynamic and it can be updated. So that's those movies that have like a holo table is kind of the best depiction that you'd see in science fiction.
And what is we'll talk about the Navy for a second, and what are they looking for? I suspect they probably want to look from satellite to seabed in the whole space for situational awareness. Is that where they are?
Yeah, essentially, and that's not exclusive to the Navy. Pretty much everyone in the armed forces here and in the U.S., once they understand what we're building, The answer is almost always the same. I want to see the whole battle space,
Right.
and I want to see it from space to seafloor. I want to know what's going on in there. I want to be able to look at things like not just the locations of assets, and their speeds and altitudes and whatnot, but actually characterizing, okay, where's the radar coverage?
Right.
That sort of thing. Like a really good example recently, I'm trying to get a demo put together for this, was in Top Gun Maverick.
Right.
They have that scene where they're planning the mission and they got to fly through a canyon,
Yep.
and there's SAM sites above the canyon, and they can't fly above a certain height because of the coverage of the SAM sites.
Right.
They do that with they just put a line in, but you could actually mathematically characterize what the radar systems on those SAM sites, how they work, and show exactly where that coverage is, so that when you plan the mission, okay, it's not just I can't fly above an altitude, but I actually have to go down here because they get more signal here and that sort of thing.
Russ, he doesn't watch a movie like you and I, Alan.
No, you're looking at movies differently. Clearly.
That movie in particular, because when I saw that scene, I'm like, oh boy, this is good for us.
I enjoyed that movie, and
Yeah.
I know that scene, but
Yeah.
I didn't analyze it like you did.
No, it's
So Russ, sensors, how are you pulling the sensors in, right? Because you walk the trade show floor here, you've got the Pangeos, which are basically X-raying you've got the Krakens, which are looking at the seabed floor.
Yeah.
You've got the CartNavs and the PALs that are surveying the airspace.
Yep.
How are all those sensors pulled in?
So fortunately for us, the forces are largely solving that problem already, because they need all that data. Whether they're able to visualize it as well as we can is a different conversation, but they're already taking all that data in. So there are a variety of protocols, the backbone of the comms to get the sensor information to, say, a command center. I only know surface level because we don't
Right.
need to deal with that. But once all that stuff gets aggregated, there are protocols for distributing it to different applications that use it in different ways.
Okay.
So we're able to piggyback on those protocols, and
Right.
either, initially we do our own sort of viewer that can say speak DIS or HLA, and talk to the different applications that run those protocols, and down the road we get more tightly integrated with battle management systems and that sort of thing.
Right. So is it safe to say that you're pretty much agnostic of sensors? It doesn't matter?
Yeah,
You
we
can pull them all
don't.
in?
We literally whatever the sensors are capable of doing, we should just be able to show it better.
Right.
Like a good example is Kraken with side aperture sonar.
Right.
The data they generate and some of the things you'll see as a 3D image on a 2D screen looks fantastic, and we can just make that even more accessible and easier to understand for a viewer because you're seeing it in 3D.
Well, just unpack that for 1 second, because you're right. The synthetic aperture sonar is giving an incredible picture already.
Yeah.
Then you superimpose Pangeo going below that,
Yep.
and you're able to kind of look at that in a whole different model.
Yeah, and actually one of the things that's very common when you see that 3D information on a 2D screen, you're almost doing it here when you describe it.
Yeah.
As a viewer, you have to rotate it around to
Right.
figure out what you're looking at in 3D.
Exactly.
With ours, your eyes are seeing it like it was like this cup, right?
Are you looking into it or at it? What are you doing?
So you're looking at it in the same way as though that physical 3D model was right here. So what it means is each eye is seeing it from slightly different angles, which is the way your whole visual system was designed to work, or evolved to work. If you move your head around, or even when your eyes just saccade and move around slowly, you're just picking up all that additional info. So, obviously in the first couple generations, it's not going to be indistinguishable from looking at the real cup, but as far as spatial awareness goes, it's the same as looking at the real object.
There's a word in video editing called opacity. Is there any opacity? And I don't know if I'm asking this question right. You can't see through the object.
Yeah,
a little bit.
You can. So we, that's all software at this point,
Right.
and we don't do anything fundamentally different with the software than you would do when you do 3D on a 2D screen. Like we run Unreal Engine and Unity. They all support things like opacity and various types of rendering. So we have a different type of way to render the content, but we can not necessarily at any given point in time. Obviously, there's a roadmap, but we can support various types of transparencies, and actually that stuff's pretty critical when you get into. If you look at again the CGI stuff you'd see in a movie,
Yeah.
they're always using that kind of translucent, transparent viewpoints to show you things like radar coverage, right? You want to know what the coverage is,
Right.
and even maybe the density of that color will tell you how strong it is at different spots, but you don't want to lose where the actual objects and landscape around it are. So we definitely end up supporting all that stuff.
Russ, how close are you to going to market on this stuff?
In a sense, we are in market, so we
Okay.
have sold a couple units already of our first, and we're actually in the process of selling a first unit of our second gen technology.
Wow.
But those are not sort of the mainstream launch product. That's coming next year,
Right.
which is a map table It's about a 40-inch diagonal screen, which is designed very carefully and specifically for a group of people to stand around and look at the battle space, interact, point in there, use things like gesture controls and the various tools you'd use in VR and AR to interact with the space and drop assets in and zoom in and out and all that stuff.
Who are the clients in the room here today?
So we've had probably the most immediate uptake from the Navy. We started talking to Canadian Navy in 2018. They've been very supportive from day one, top to bottom. So we're engaged pretty heavily with them. We've seen a huge amount of interest from SOCOM and SOFCOM here and SOCOM in the US.
Right.
And frankly, we know the interest is there in all the other branches. We've had just less engagement up to now, mostly because we've been focused on the Navy and the SOCOM folks.
So, is military your only focus, or is there application beyond that, and are you focusing on that as well?
Yeah, so if you think about a 3D display, anywhere you've got 3D content, there's a fit. So in the long term, our markets are very broad. Pretty much the display, everywhere you sell displays, we may have a fit. We're initially engaged with the defense industry and the medical industries, mostly because of the consequences of the value proposition. So these are in both of those industries, they're life and death situations where the value of reducing cognitive load and improving decision making accuracy and speed are very measurable and very obvious. So being a new technology, and there's always adoption curves, and that's more expensive and stuff. That's why we start with those industries. But as we move forward, we'll end up in a flat panel technology that can be manufactured at scale, just like 2D TVs are. The costs come down, the volumes go up, and then you're into there's a 3-phase detailed market strategy, but there's dozen markets that this stuff fits in. It's just the timing is really the main difference.
A couple of quick final questions for you. You're obviously a member of the aerospace ACADA, Atlantic Canada Aerospace and Defense Association, and tell me what being a part of that means to you.
It's been great. We've actually had a tremendous amount of support and success from both ACADA and ACOA. Being a St. John's-based company, that's our primary interface into the defense industry. Neither Wally or I worked in defense prior to this, so it was all learning curve coming in, and that's where some of the initial introductions and inroads we had with, say, the Navy came from, and they've been very supportive throughout. We've especially early on when we were attending trade shows but not exhibiting, being able to leverage the fact that they have presence at these spaces and you can go and they will help you do B2B connections. That was all invaluable and continues to be very valuable. And
I guess my final question to you would be, DevSec, second year back in person here. What did you think of the show so far?
It's been awesome for us. I mean, DevSec's always, I think, one of the best shows we go to. In part maybe because we're engaged with the Navy, so we get to see everyone and catch up on everything all at one spot, which is great. This year's been fantastic. We got almost everything we needed to do done yesterday, so it's very tiring but very good. And it's nice to be back, sort of unfettered this year. And it's nice to just be able to go back to normal. So it's been great.
And I guess I have one last question, Jerry. I'm sorry, but there'd be a lot of people watching this, and I would argue there'd be a lot of young people watching this and saying, "That is cool. Absolutely. I would like to work with that company." What would you tell a young person or somebody who's in career transition about working with you?
So working with Avalon specifically, we are a very personnel-oriented company. So Wally's actually run companies before and has a very distinct philosophy on how to maintain productivity, and it's not about structure, like having top-down control. It's very much about autonomy and people. You tell people what needs to happen, and you let them figure out how to go about making it happen. And it's if you're used to top-down management, that sounds scary. It actually works very well. So it's a very dynamic environment. Our team is very young, actually. Other than old guys like me, most of the team is very young. And it's a very energetic group. So it's actually a lot of fun. I go to the office. I'm not in the office in St. John's, but I try to go once a quarter, 3 times a year. Just it's a good infusion of energy. So it's a great place to work. And I would say if you're in the graphics, or if you're interested in graphics in general, you might as well start down this path, because 10 years from now, this stuff's going to be everywhere.
You know what? I'm going to say this. What I love about you and Wally, successful exits, not resting on your laurels. You're digging in, 5th startup, Kudos to you, man.
Wally's a bit crazy that way. He put most of his winnings, I'll call them, right back into this. And we started talking about this before. Like when he got acquired, there was a bit of a period where you're still kind of with the old company.
Yep.
We started talking about it in 2012, and I think within 3 weeks of him being finished at the old job, he had already incorporated, and he was
Here we go
nose
again.
to the grindstone. And I was like, man, I would have taken a couple months if I were you, but that's great.
Well, there it is, folks. Avalon Holographics. Thank you very much, Russ.
Thanks.
Fascinating conversation. There's no doubt about it. The future is here, and it's just in the back corner of the Blue Drop Hall over
right.
there. Go see it. Day 2, DevSec 2022, presented by Cisco.